What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Tate Talk Sports Podcast. Back with the final edition of my Euros predictions. And obviously, if you didn't watch the games over the weekend, the final is Italy versus England. Italy getting past Spain in extra time and penalties, and England getting past Denmark in extra time alone. Um, if you didn't watch the games, both were really good. I think both actually weren't the best performances from either side that make the final, especially Italy. But that tends to happen when you play against Spain, and we've seen that happen with other teams. When the other team dominates possession, it kind of takes a bit of the juice out of you. But one thing that really did affect Italy that I'm just going to get straight into it is they lost their left back Spinazzola, and it's really affected their dynamism down the wings because they generally had their fullbacks overlapping and their wingers playing off of that. And it really wasn't happening in that Spain game. And it might have just been because Spain was dominating possession and the way they played them. But I think it really affected them losing that player, and they didn't quite look the same going forward. Obviously, still did enough to win, so big credits to them. And they're obviously undefeated for, I think, over 30 games now. And they've looked dangerous all tournament. Massive, massive threat. It's going to be really cool to see what happens there. Getting into England, England played Denmark and showed strength coming back from 1-0. That was probably, to this point, the biggest question about them is what happens when they go down. Can they come back? Because they hadn't done that so far. And we saw a quick reaction from England. Obviously, they didn't technically score the goal. It was an own goal, but it was created from a fantastic move. And they did end up coming back. Also, another interesting point is they are still yet to concede from open play. That goal that they suffered in the game was a direct free kick, a brilliant one at that, but it was a direct free kick. So they're still yet to concede from open play, which shows how dominant that defense is and still is this whole tournament. To me, they didn't look their best against Denmark because they didn't quite score how they wanted to. They looked really good in the midfield, especially in the second half. The first half was very shaky, but the second half and extra time, they looked really, really good with subs coming on and everything. Southgate ended up managing it perfectly once again. Obviously, they win off a questionable penalty, but however it happens, they win. So they did end up getting that win. Looking forward to this final with Italy versus England. What are the keys for England? I think the keys for England is the midfield duo. Obviously, everyone has to work, but I think the midfield duo, when they're playing well, England plays well. And that's because they've got two really good game managers in the midfield with Declan Rice and Calvin Phillips. Calvin Phillips is able to pass the ball forward sometimes and find runs and even rip a long shot every now and again. And Declan Rice holds it down. He sits in front of those center backs and he manages and he presses after they lose possession. And if they're dominating that midfield and they're keeping players from rushing in behind and stopping gaps, then that's really going to be the key because Italy are dangerous on the counter specifically. And so if that midfield can stop that counter or even just slow down that counter before it really gets out of hand, because England has been vulnerable to that, that's going to be huge for England. On the other hand, for Italy, it's the counter. They have to be brutal on the counter because I think England is really good at defending just kind of open play and if the other team's dominating possession. But if they can be quick on the counter and get by that midfield, then that back line is somewhat vulnerable, which leads me to my point that another key player for England is Walker. Kyle Walker on the right side is going to be key because Italy are going to be coming fast in the counter, and he's going to be the one who's going to have to clean it up. Whether it's on the right, the left, center, he's going to have to be everywhere, and he has been everywhere, but he's going to have to do it one more time. The next big question for England is who starts on the right wing. Seems like I've been saying this every single game, but again, the candidates are Saka, Sancho, and Rashford. To me, those are the biggest candidates. And obviously, Saka starting the last game and the games before it, besides when Sancho started. It seems like Southgate trusts him a lot. And my guess, if I had to guess, is he'll probably go with him again. But if it were me, I would go with Sancho. I think Saka is a bit too young for this situation, a bit too inexperienced for this situation being a final. I wouldn't be mad if he started. I think he's a great player. I'd just be a bit afraid of him taking too long to get into the game, kind of like he did against Denmark, which is why I want Sancho in there, because Southgate is just not going to start Grealish. He just wants him off the bench for whatever reason. And Sancho, it's basically Grealish, but on the right and a bit more skillful, because he's a winger, more of a pure winger than Grealish is. And he brings that creativity that I think is necessary for England to score. England really haven't scored, except in the Ukraine game, without one of those creative players on. And by creative players, I mean Sancho or Grealish, or another midfielder who's really good at passing. And I think it's because that front just needs that one bit of magic, one extra ball, and Sancho and Grealish are those guys to play it. And if Sancho's in there from the start, I think that'll really help. Another guy, obviously the third guy I mentioned, Marcus Rashford, I really wouldn't mind at all if he started, because he's going to be strong at breaking at the back line and finishing strong, which actually leads me to Italy's strengths and weaknesses, and that's their back line. Obviously, they've arguably been their best players this tournament, and that is the center backs Bonucci and Chiellini. They're older now, but they're so strong, and they're big, and they've been good all tournament, and they're their strength. But they're also, to me, their weakness. And that's why I bring up Rashford, because Chiellini and Bonucci are towering center backs, and they're going to be able to neutralize players like Kane in the box, a guy who needs a delivery, who needs a bit of a pass, and his strength is bodying. He's not going to really be able to do that against Bonucci and Chiellini. So my guess is he might drop back a little bit more, like we saw him in the last game, to facilitate. And so that's where Italy has a strength, is they're going to be neutralizing Kane to a degree. But where they're vulnerable is they are older and they are bigger, so they're slower. They're much slower. So if a player like Rashford starts on that right side, then he can break that line and probably dribble through that line fairly easily, with players like Sterling as well, who could also do that. So that's why I wouldn't mind seeing Rashford start. I don't think he will, because he really doesn't play on the right side. But like I said, he'd be really strong at breaking that back line, which I think is a key for England to score in this game. That's really my main keys for this game from both sides. It's going to be the counter for Italy, and it's going to be pace and quickness for England, which is a bit different than how they've played. And that brings up my last point, which is a lot of people have been saying England needs to play differently than they have, to beat Italy this time. And sure, they have to play differently, but I don't think it's drastic. I think England, if they can hold the possession and be deadly in attack, then they are going to do just fine, and they don't really have to change too much. So that's it for really the keys of each side, which leads me to my prediction. And I'm sure you could have guessed at this point, it's going to be England for me. I think England have so many advantages. One, they're at home. That's their biggest advantage. They're going to have 50,000 people cheering for them plus in Wembley. And that is a massive advantage in itself. Italy are obviously going to have fans there, but they're not going to have nearly the number that England do. And also, I think England, probably on a position by position basis, is probably a tad stronger than Italy, and it's going to be really interesting to see how these two teams play against one another. I think both teams have really come into form as the tournament has gone on. And so they're both kind of meeting each other at the peaks of their form and chemistries as a team. So it's going to be a match to watch. If you're not planning on watching it, change your plans, watch it. It's going to be the game to watch on the weekend. So of course, England winning. I'm not sure of the score. It could be anything. But that is my prediction, is England winning. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you have any ideas for other videos you want to make me do as these Euros are coming to a close, please let me know in the comments. I'd be really interested in seeing your ideas. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.